can't protect those rights from your neighbor. So you contract with government, right, to protect your rights. So the idea that Locke put forward was that, look, government is a contract. It's a deal. It's an agreement between the people and the king, right? You know, Locke actually wrote to justify the Glorious Revolution, which we have not talked about in class, but is discussed in your book, and Mr. Sean Whelan discussed extensively last year, and you remember like it was yesterday. The Glorious Revolution is when basically the British people kicked the king out, and they invited William of Orange to come from Holland and be their king. We don't like James II, right? We don't want him to be our king anymore. We want you to be our king. So you come. So now how can, if God puts the king on the throne, then how could the people of England justify kicking one king out and bringing another one in? Well, Locke said, well, that's not how it works. God doesn't put the king on the throne. The way that it works is the king is responsible to protect the natural rights of the people. If the king doesn't do that, then the people have the right, the responsibility to replace that king with one that does. Now, the people must obey the king as long as their rights are being protected. So it's a deal. If you remember that sort of contract, that sort of notion, basically Jefferson argued in the Declaration of Independence, a liberal document, an enlightened document, that that deal had been broken by the king. Remember in the Declaration of Independence, all of the he's, he hath, he had done all these things, attacking the king, arguing he had violated the contract. So, Locke's contract theory of government is an important part of enlightened thinking that affects colonial America. More often than not, we associate Benjamin Franklin with the Enlightenment, right? We associate him with sort of the symbol of enlightenment in America. The other movement that I wanted to mention quickly was the Great Awakening, right? So we had, mercantilism, the Enlightenment, and the Great Awakening. The Great Awakening was, Melissa, a religious revival. The Enlightenment was not something that started in the United States. It started in Europe and spread to the United States. And the Enlightenment was not something that affected every single American. Every single American didn't say Locke, Rousseau, science, the nature of man. Incidentally, the Enlightenment put a lot of confidence in science. And the Enlightenment is often associated with what we call modern thinking. Modern man can make its world better. The biggest challenge to the Enlightenment and enlightened ideas was when they detonated the nuclear bomb. When they detonated the nuclear bomb at Los Alamos, New Mexico, in 1945, then basically science had created a device that could destroy humanity. So now, if we argue that science is progress, right, and that humans progress through science and through reason, now that reason and progress had created something that could destroy humanity. And so then that calls into question the Enlightenment, right? And sometimes they call the period after the detonation of the nuclear weapon the postmodern period, right? Because now we're saying, hey, if humans have the capacity to use science to destroy themselves, is the faith that they have in reason and progress justified? But anyways, that's deep stuff, Kelly K. You may get a headache if you think of it too long. Now, but to the Great Awakening. The Great Awakening was pure and simple, one of what is going to be numerous religious revivals, evangelical religious revivals. Evangelical religious revivals are going to have something in common. There is a first Great Awakening. There is a second Great Awakening. What they share in common is sort of an emotional appeal to people's sensibilities about religion, right? Okay, the first Great Awakening was a religious revival that basically suggested that theologically, God chooses certain people to be saved. Nothing new about that. Traditional predestination. But the Second Great Awakening's sort of extension of that is, that's really, really good, right? That's really good that God chooses some people to be saved, because if he doesn't, you'll go and burn in endless hells forever and ever and ever and ever, and that's really bad. So the fact that God picks some of you is incredible grace that people should be grateful and thankful for and feel viscerally. They should feel that in their soul. They should understand, you know, the grace of God, the goodness of God is compared to the decadence of man. And if they understood that, then they would behave differently and life would be different. You know, and sort of, you know, the First Great Awakening sort of urged people to come to this sort of emotional understanding of their decadence, how bad they were, how good God was, and sort of to convert, right, to this salvation. Remember, the Second Great Awakening is in the 1830s, and that's when kind of the evangelical ministers start to say, as a part of sort of the Jacksonian era, that God doesn't really, God picks everybody. It's up to you to accept it, right? You know, so you can actually accept that salvation rather than more sort of being predestined to it. But in both cases, emotion was a part of it. Dynamic, demonstrative speaking was a part of it. When we say speaking, we're talking about preaching. Dynamic leaders inspired congregations to feel certain things and then to take specific actions. In the First Great Awakening, we said the leadership was Jonathan Edwards, right? Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, which you read extensively in your English classes and remember like it was yesterday. And more significantly, George Whitefield, whose evangelical speaking tour through colonial America was the first colonial-wide event. And we said that part of Whitefield's message was that, you know, God can choose anyone, right? And that there was sort of this egalitarianism, and that the trained ministry didn't have a monopoly on sort of inspiring the faithful. And so people questioned the authority of their churches and questioned the authority of their ministers. And, you know, they said that sort of questioning was a short step to questioning the authority of the British in the American Revolution. Now, okay. So we've got colonial America, and clearly there is lots more to say about colonial America. You know, you could talk about, you know, certainly slavery, class stratification, the economies, you know, the plantation versus the small farming, the importance of trade in New England. I should tell you this, that most of the industry in colonial America is absolutely local. Most of the manufactured products in colonial America are coming from England. And this is true up through the War of 1812. That manufacturing in the Industrial Revolution is hitting England first and America second. Now, but I do want to move on and just mention before we conclude, and I promise you I concluded 8 o'clock on my watch, and it's about 8 minutes till now. I promise you, because I don't want you to get mad. I mentioned before that there were 4 wars for empire. Global conflicts between France and her allies and England and her allies for, you know, sort of imperial dominance, you know, and, you know, France, you know, is going to, you know, connect in these wars, and 3 of them, you know, we mentioned as you know, sort of maybe being significant, but in the first 3 wars for empire between France and England, the North American colonies are only marginally involved. Neither group sends troops there. However, when the Third War for Empire ended in 1748, the French had vast colonial holdings in Canada, in the interior of what would be the then United States. From the St. Lawrence Seaway down through the Mississippi River Valley, the French claimed, and to some extent the British recognized, in that territory that was called New France. Now, in the eve of the French and Indian War, you know, New France only had about 60,000 Frenchmen. And the British North America, a much smaller geographic area, had about 1.5 million people, you know, whether, you know, they were slaves or free or Europeans, in the British colonies that were there. So Britain had a far greater population. France had a far wider area. But the settlement between France and Britain, the differences were, you know, sort of significant. Periodically they asked about that. That would be bad. That would be bad if they ask about French settlement versus British settlement.